Who was Seth, and why don't most people know his incredible story? While millions know about Cain and Abel, the third son of Adam and Eve remains one of the Bible's most overlooked figures, yet his lineage would change the course of human history forever. Seth wasn't just another biblical character, he was the ancestor of Noah, and through him, every person alive today. His story reveals how God's plan for redemption began in the darkest moment of the first family, when brother unlived brother and hope seemed lost. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We'd love to hear from you. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The appointed son. The world lies broken. Eden stands sealed behind flaming swords. Two brothers once walked these lands. One brought grain, the other brought blood. Now Cain wanders marked and exiled. Abel's voice cries from the ground. Eve weeps over empty arms. But life stirs again. In her womb grows another chance, another hope. When the child arrives, she names him Seth. The word means appointed, chosen, set in place. God has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, she whispers, for Cain slew him. This naming carries weight beyond a mother's grief. Seth comes not as replacement, but as fulfillment. Where Abel's life was cut short, Seth's will continue the sacred line. Where Cain turned toward violence, Seth will walk in righteousness. The appointment comes from above. Divine purpose flows through this newborn's blood. Adam holds his third son and sees something different. This child bears no mark of exile like Cain, no shadow of early death like Abel. Instead, Seth carries the image of his father, the same features, the same divine spark passed down from creation's first breath. According to the Genesis account, when Adam was 130 years old, he begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. The timing matters. 30 years have passed since Abel's blood soaked the earth, 30 years of mourning, of waiting, of wondering if God's promise to humanity would survive. Seth's birth breaks this silence. Hope returns to a family that had known only loss. Yet, Seth enters a world forever changed. The innocence of Eden cannot be recovered. Knowledge of good and evil shapes every choice. Death has entered human experience. The earth itself rebels against human hands. Thorns choke the grain. Sweat must water every harvest. This is the inheritance Seth receives. But with hardship comes purpose. Seth will become the father of a new line. Through him, humanity will learn to call upon the name of the Lord. Through his descendants will come the righteous, the faithful, those who walk with God despite the broken world around them. The line that will preserve divine memory across generations. In ancient texts, Seth represents more than survival. He embodies restoration. Where the first chapters of human history speak of falling, Seth begins the long story of rising, not back to Eden. That path remains closed, but forward toward something new. A different kind of relationship with the divine, one built not on innocence, but on choice, not on perfection, but on faithfulness. The child grows strong. His parents pour into him all they remember of the garden, the way light looked before shadows fell, the sound of God's voice in the cool of evening, the names of every living thing, the purpose behind each star. This knowledge becomes Seth's inheritance, more precious than gold, more vital than breath itself. Seth learns to tend the ground despite its cursing, to coax life from reluctant soil, to see beauty in a world marked by thorns. His hands grow calloused like his father's. His back bends under the sun's harsh rays, but his heart remains tender toward the divine. This becomes his defining trait. Physical strength matched by spiritual sensitivity. The genealogies call Seth the father of humanity's righteous line, but first, he is simply a son learning to live in a fallen world. Each day brings new challenges. How to survive winter's bite. How to heal sickness without Eden's tree of life. How to pass on truth when writing has not yet been invented. These practical struggles shape Seth's character as much as any divine calling. Stories grow around Seth's childhood, how he learned to distinguish poisonous plants from healing ones, how he discovered fire's secrets, how he built the first tools beyond what Adam taught him. Each innovation helps his family survive. Each discovery pushes back against the curse's power. Seth becomes humanity's first problem solver, the one who finds new ways forward when old paths are blocked. As Seth matures, his role clarifies. He will be the bridge between Eden's memory and humanity's future. the keeper of divine promise in a world that seems to have forgotten its creator. Through him, the sacred line will continue. Through his children, worship will be reborn. Through his legacy, hope will outlive despair. Two bloodlines, two civilizations. Two sons of Adam choose different paths. Their children follow these paths into the future. Cain's line builds cities, Seth's line seeks God. From this split grows humanity's first great divide. Two ways of being human, two visions of what life should become. Cain's descendants move east. They settle in the land of Nod. Wandering, always wandering, but they do not wander aimlessly. They build, they create, they innovate. Cain himself founds a city, names it after his son Enoch, the first urban center in human history. Walls rise from the wilderness, streets form patterns. Humans gather and organize communities for protection and progress. These cities become centers of human achievement. Jabal invents livestock herding. Jubal creates musical instruments. Tubal-Cain forges tools from bronze and iron. Each generation adds something new to human knowledge. Art flourishes alongside technology. Songs echo through city squares. Metal rings against metal in workshops. The descendants of Cain push the boundaries of what humans can accomplish. But something else grows in these cities. Violence multiplies. Lamech, Cain's great-great-great-grandson, boasts of his deadly deeds. I have slain a man to my wounding and a young man to my hurt, he declares. If Cain's vengeance was sevenfold, Lamech claims 77-fold. The culture of retribution intensifies. Blood calls for more blood. The cycle of violence that began with Abel's death spreads like infection through human society. Pride accompanies this violence. The city builders believe their achievements make them godlike. They create their own laws, form their own religious practices, worship their own images. The memory of Eden fades in their chronicles. They tell new stories about human origins, stories that make humans the heroes, stories that reduce the divine to distant myth. Meanwhile, Seth's line takes a different path. They remain connected to the land, close to the soil that Abel's blood once watered. They remember, they preserve the old stories, they teach their children about the garden, about the tree of life, about the promise that someday things would be made right again. Seth's descendants do not abandon innovation entirely. They learn agriculture. They develop simple tools. They discover new ways to work with wood and stone. But their progress serves different purposes, not dominance, but stewardship, not self-glorification, but divine service. They see themselves as caretakers of creation rather than conquerors of it. The contrast deepens with each generation. Cain's line multiplies rapidly. Their cities spread across the ancient lands. Trade networks connect distant settlements. Specialized crafts emerge. Wealth accumulates. Political structures develop. The first kingdoms take shape in the eastern regions where Cain's children built their walls. Seth's line grows more slowly. They value depth over breadth, quality over quantity. Each child receives careful training in divine memory. Each generation passes down the sacred stories unchanged. They become humanity's librarians, the keepers of truth in an age of forgetting. Their settlements remain small. Their lifestyle stays simple. But their connection to the divine remains strong. Marriage customs reveal the divide. Cain's descendants intermarry freely. Physical attraction and social advantage guide their choices. Beauty and wealth matter more than character or faith. Their marriages produce clever children, talented children, children who excel in arts and crafts and warfare, but not necessarily children who remember God. Seth's line chooses marriage partners more carefully. They seek companions who share their values, who remember the same stories, who worship the same God. Their marriages may seem less dramatic, less passionate, but they produce children who carry forward the sacred traditions, who maintain the connection to divine purpose. The two bloodlines create different types of civilization. Cain's descendants build for themselves, for their own glory. Their achievements tower toward heaven in defiance of divine authority. They want to be remembered, to leave monuments that will outlast their brief lives. Their cities become testimony to human capability unleashed from divine restraint. Seth's descendants build for others, for their children, for future generations they will never meet. Their achievements point beyond themselves toward divine purposes. They want to be faithful, to leave legacies that honor their creator rather than themselves. Their quiet communities become testimony to human potential aligned with divine will. Both bloodlines face the same challenges: disease, natural disasters, resource scarcity, death's inevitability. But they respond differently. Cain's line fights these challenges through human ingenuity alone. They develop medicine, build flood defenses, create storage systems, organize armies. They try to solve every problem through human effort and intelligence. Seth's line combines human effort with divine dependence. They work hard but also pray hard. They plan carefully but also trust deeply. They see challenges as opportunities to demonstrate faith rather than just tests of human capability. Their solutions may be simpler, but they often prove more sustainable over time. The divide creates tension between the bloodlines. Cain's descendants view Seth's line as backward, primitive, superstitious. Why worship an invisible God when human achievement produces visible results? Why depend on divine help when human ingenuity solves problems? Why maintain old traditions when new ideas offer better solutions? Seth's descendants view Cain's line as dangerous, proud, forgetful of their true origins. They see the violence in the cities, the growing arrogance, the abandonment of divine worship. They worry that humanity is choosing the wrong path, moving away from its purpose, forgetting its creator in pursuit of created things. This tension will grow across the generations. Two visions of human destiny competing for the future. Two ways of understanding humanity's place in creation. Two responses to the fundamental questions that every generation must answer. What does it mean to be human? What should humans aspire to become? How should they relate to the divine? The answers that Cain's line and Seth's line develop will shape everything that follows. The world of the first people. The ancient lands stretch far beyond what modern minds can grasp. Rivers flow differently here. Mountains rise higher. Valleys run deeper. This is Earth before the Great Flood reshaped its face. A world where geography itself seems more alive, more connected to the divine purposes that shaped it from the beginning. The climate runs warmer than what comes later. No ice covers the northern regions. Lush vegetation spreads across vast territories. The atmosphere holds more moisture, creates perfect growing conditions across regions that will someday become desert. Rivers flow year-round through valleys that will later know only seasonal streams. The whole planet breathes with abundance. In this world, humans live differently than their distant descendants. Their bodies carry less damage from accumulated generations of genetic decay. They stand taller, live longer, heal faster. Disease touches them more lightly. The original blessing of creation still flows through their veins, though diminished from Eden's perfection. Death exists but comes slowly, very slowly. Seth grows up hearing stories of paradise lost. His parents described trees that bore fruit without thorns, rivers that watered the ground without rainfall, animals that lived in harmony without fear, light that filled the sky without sun or moon. These memories shape Seth's understanding of what the world should become again someday. But the world Seth inhabits bears little resemblance to Eden's perfection. The ground resists human cultivation. Weeds compete with crops. Insects destroy harvests. Wild animals turn dangerous. Weather patterns become unpredictable. The curse affects every aspect of daily life. Yet, compared to later ages, this world still holds echoes of its original design. Forests cover most of the land. Massive trees tower toward the sky. Their trunks grow so wide that entire families can shelter inside hollow spaces. Their branches spread so far that walking from one edge of a tree's shade to another takes half a day. These giants provide everything humans need: food from their fruits, medicine from their bark, shelter from their branches, tools from their wood. The animals display remarkable intelligence, more than modern species possess. They respond to human speech, follow complex commands, work alongside humans in ways that seem almost impossible to later generations. Horses run faster, birds fly higher, fish grow larger. Every species expresses its nature more fully in this world closer to creation's dawn. Seth learns to work with these creatures rather than dominate them. He speaks to oxen as partners in cultivation, calls to birds as allies in finding water, asks trees for permission before taking their fruit. This relationship between humans and nature reflects something of Eden's original harmony. Not perfect cooperation, but respectful partnership between the various forms of life. Water flows more abundantly than in later ages. Springs emerge from rocky ground where none will exist after the flood. Rivers run broader and cleaner. Lakes stretch to distant horizons. The water itself seems more vital, more alive, with properties that strengthen human health. Drinking from these sources provides nourishment beyond mere hydration, healing beyond simple thirst quenching. The soil produces crops with extraordinary nutritional density, grains that grow taller than humans, fruits that feed families for days, vegetables that provide complete nourishment from small portions. The earth responds to human cultivation with generous abundance. Though work remains necessary, the results far exceed the effort invested. A single harvest can sustain a community through long seasons. At night, the stars shine brighter than later generations will ever see. The atmosphere holds less pollution, less dust. The light reaches Earth with crystal clarity. Constellations tell stories that connect directly to human experience. The movements of heavenly bodies mark seasons and guide navigation with perfect accuracy. The sky serves as both calendar and compass for those who learn to read its messages. Seth grows up under these brilliant stars. He learns their patterns from his father Adam. Each constellation carries meaning, stories of divine purpose written across the heavens. The same God who walked in Eden's garden set these lights in place. They remind humanity that divine presence still oversees the world despite the separation caused by sin. Sound travels differently in this world. Human voices carry farther. Animals communicate across greater distances. The earth itself seems more resonant. Music holds power that later generations can barely imagine. Songs literally heal sickness. Harmonies calm wild beasts. Rhythms coordinate group labor with supernatural efficiency. The connection between sound and spirit remains strong. Minerals exist in purer forms. Metals emerge from the ground with less refinement needed. Precious stones display colors and clarity unmatched by later discoveries. These materials serve practical purposes as well as decorative ones. Certain metals hold healing properties. Specific stones enhance human abilities. The earth provides exactly what humans need for their physical and spiritual development. The weather follows more predictable patterns. Rain comes when needed for crops. Sunshine arrives when required for harvest. Storms bring necessary change without devastating destruction. The seasons flow smoothly from one to another. Humans can plan their activities with confidence that natural conditions will cooperate. The relationship between heaven and earth maintains divine order. In this abundant world, Seth learns the art of memory. Without written language, everything important must be preserved in human minds. Stories, songs, genealogies, technical knowledge, spiritual truths. Each generation becomes a living library for the next. Seth masters techniques for organizing vast amounts of information in easily recalled patterns. The landscape itself serves as a teaching tool. Certain mountains hold significance for divine encounters. Specific valleys mark important events. Particular rivers define tribal boundaries. The earth becomes humanity's first book. Its features tell stories that must be remembered. Its beauty reflects truths about the divine character that shaped it. Yet shadows grow across this abundant world. Violence spreads through Cain's cities. Pride corrupts human hearts. Memory of Eden fades among those who choose to forget. The very abundance that should inspire gratitude instead feeds human arrogance. Some begin to believe their prosperity comes from their own wisdom rather than divine blessing. Seth watches these changes with growing concern. He sees how quickly humans can turn from worship to self-worship, from gratitude to entitlement, from cooperation to competition. The world provides everything needed for human flourishing, but humans must choose whether to use these gifts wisely or waste them on selfish pursuits. This choice will define everything that follows. The abundant world of the first people offers unlimited potential for good or evil. The same resources that could build paradise on earth can also create hell on earth. Everything depends on whether humans remember their creator or forget him in their fascination with his creation. The rise of worship. Something shifts when Enosh is born to Seth. The child arrives as hope takes new form in the world. Seth holds his son and speaks a name that means mortal, frail. The word carries weight beyond its simple meaning. It acknowledges human limitation while embracing human potential. Enosh will be mortal, but his mortality will serve divine purposes. The birth marks a turning point in human history. According to the ancient records, during Enosh's lifetime, humans begin to call upon the name of the Lord. This simple phrase describes a revolution in human consciousness. For the first time since Eden's closure, humans actively seek divine connection. They move beyond mere memory of God toward actual relationship with Him. Before Enosh, worship existed but remained private. Adam and Eve remembered their walks with God in Eden's garden. They taught their children about divine character and purpose. They offered sacrifices, as Abel had done. But these acts of worship stayed within family circles, personal expressions of faith rather than communal celebrations. Enosh's generation changes this pattern. They gather together to call upon the divine name. They create the first intentional communities focused on worship. These assemblies might seem simple by later standards, groups of families meeting under starlight, voices joined in songs their grandparents taught them, hands raised toward heaven in gestures of surrender and plea. But simplicity does not mean insignificance. These early worship gatherings establish patterns that will echo through all subsequent human history. The recognition that humans need divine help, the understanding that God responds to sincere seeking, the power of corporate prayer and praise, the importance of teaching children to participate in sacred community. The Hebrew phrase translated as "call upon the name of the Lord" carries deeper meaning than casual English suggests. To call upon the name means to invoke the character and authority of the one named. When Enosh's generation begins this practice, they acknowledge God's sovereignty over their lives. They submit to divine authority. They request divine intervention in their circumstances. This calling requires knowledge of the divine name itself. Adam has preserved this sacred information through the generations since Eden, the name that God revealed to him in the garden, the name that carries power to heal and help and transform. Enosh's generation receives this name as precious inheritance. They use it with reverence and hope. The gatherings probably begin small, Seth teaching his son Enosh the sacred traditions, Enosh sharing these truths with his own children, extended families meeting to remember divine goodness together. But the practice spreads as its benefits become apparent. Communities that call upon the Lord experience divine blessing, protection from disasters, guidance in difficult decisions, healing for the sick, peace in conflicts. Word travels through the ancient lands. Other families hear about these gatherings. They come seeking to learn the divine name for themselves, to experience the peace and power that accompanies true worship. The assemblies grow from family meetings to tribal celebrations, from occasional gatherings to regular festivals, from private devotion to public proclamation. Music develops as central to these worship experiences. The descendants of Seth learned to create instruments from natural materials, flutes from hollow reeds, drums from stretched animal skins, string instruments from dried gourds and sinew. These tools help human voices carry divine praise across valleys and hills. They create atmosphere that invites divine presence into human gatherings. The songs themselves preserve crucial information, genealogies set to memorable melodies, stories of divine faithfulness arranged in poetic verses, promises about future hope woven into choruses that children can easily learn. Music becomes the technology that preserves truth across generations in a world without written language. Dance accompanies the music, not entertainment, but expression of divine joy. Bodies moving in patterns that mirror the harmony of creation itself. Movements that tell stories about divine character and human purpose. Physical expression of spiritual truths that words alone cannot contain. The whole person engaged in worship of the whole God. Sacred spaces begin to emerge, not buildings but locations where divine encounters occur more frequently. Hilltops where the stars seem closer, valleys where voices carry farther, groves where ancient trees provide natural cathedrals. These places become pilgrimage destinations, sites where different families and tribes gather for major celebrations. Certain individuals emerge as leaders in these worship communities, people who demonstrate special gifting for leading songs, for organizing gatherings, for teaching children, for offering prayers that seem particularly effective. These leaders do not claim divine authority for themselves. They simply serve the community's need for coordination and guidance in worship practices. The timing of worship gatherings follows natural rhythms, new moon celebrations, seasonal festivals aligned with planting and harvest, Sabbath observances that provide rest from labor. These regular patterns create stability in community life. They ensure that divine relationship receives priority alongside daily survival needs. Sacrificial offerings accompany the vocal worship. Animals given in gratitude for divine provision, grains offered as symbols of human dependence on divine blessing, precious items surrendered to demonstrate that God deserves the best of human possessions. These sacrifices teach important lessons about divine worthiness and human stewardship. The children receive special attention in these worship gatherings. They learn the sacred songs, participate in simple rituals, hear the old stories told in ways that capture their imagination. The community understands that worship practices must transfer successfully to the next generation, or they will disappear entirely. Every gathering includes elements designed specifically for young participants. As the practice spreads, it creates distinction between communities that call upon the Lord and those that do not. Seth's descendants become known as the worshiping people. Their settlements can be identified by the sounds of praise that carry across the landscape. Their daily rhythms include regular pauses for prayer and gratitude. This distinction will grow more pronounced as time passes. The worship of the true God will become the defining characteristic of the righteous line, the practice that separates them from surrounding cultures that turn toward false gods and human pride. What begins in Enosh's lifetime as simple calling upon the divine name will develop into rich traditions of faith that sustain humanity through its darkest seasons ahead. The silent generations. The genealogies record their names but tell few stories. Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared. These descendants of Seth live long lives and leave minimal written history, yet their names themselves carry meaning, hidden clues about their character and purpose, windows into the ancient world's understanding of human destiny. Kenan receives his name from his father Enosh. The word means possession or acquired, not in the sense of owning objects, but in the deeper sense of being established. Kenan represents the generation that consolidates the worship practices begun in his father's time. He takes the spontaneous spiritual movements of Enosh's era and creates sustainable traditions from them. Under Kenan's leadership, the calling upon the Lord's name becomes systematic. Regular gatherings replace sporadic meetings. Established songs replace improvised praise. Trained leaders replace spontaneous speakers. This systematization might seem to reduce spiritual vitality, but actually it ensures spiritual survival. The practices become strong enough to weather difficult seasons ahead. Kenan lives 910 years according to the ancient records, nearly a full millennium of faithful service. During this immense lifespan, he witnesses the rise and fall of entire civilizations among Cain's descendants. Cities built and destroyed, technologies developed and abandoned, political systems created and dissolved. Yet, through all these changes, Kenan maintains steady devotion to divine worship. His son Mahalalel carries a name meaning praise of God or glory of God. This name suggests that worship practices continue to develop during his lifetime. The simple calling upon divine name evolves into more elaborate expressions of praise. Songs become more sophisticated. Instruments multiply in variety. Sacred dances grow more complex. The community learns to offer worship worthy of the divine glory it celebrates. Mahalalel lives 895 years. His long lifespan spans the development of advanced technologies among Cain's descendants. He watches the invention of bronze working, sees the rise of urban architecture, observes the creation of complex irrigation systems, yet he chooses to maintain the simpler lifestyle of his ancestors. Technology serves human needs, but does not replace divine dependence. During Mahalalel's lifetime, the contrast between the two bloodlines becomes more pronounced. Cain's descendants achieve remarkable innovations in metallurgy, agriculture, and construction. Their cities grow into regional powers. Their armies develop sophisticated weapons. Their artists create works of stunning beauty. Their accomplishments seem to demonstrate human potential unleashed from divine limitations. Meanwhile, Seth's line appears to stagnate in comparison. They maintain traditional agricultural practices, build simple structures, create functional rather than decorative objects, preserve old songs rather than compose new ones. To outside observers, they seem backward, resistant to progress, trapped in outdated ways of thinking. But this apparent stagnation serves important purposes. While Cain's descendants chase innovation for its own sake, Seth's line focuses on preservation of essential truths. They become humanity's memory keepers, the guardians of divine revelation passed down from Eden itself. Their resistance to change protects them from the spiritual corruption that accompanies rapid cultural transformation. Jared continues this pattern when he assumes leadership of the righteous line. His name means descent, or to come down. This might refer to physical descent from Adam through the generations, but it also suggests spiritual descent, the continuing flow of divine blessing from generation to generation. The preservation of sacred traditions despite external pressures to abandon them. Jared lives 962 years, the longest recorded lifespan except for Methuselah, who comes later. This extraordinary longevity allows him to provide stability across nearly 10 centuries of human development. He serves as living link between the earliest post-Eden generations and the pre-flood world's final chapters. His memory spans the entire history of antediluvian civilization. Under Jared's guidance, Seth's descendants face increasing pressure to conform to surrounding cultures. Intermarriage with Cain's line becomes more common. Young people question the value of maintaining old traditions. The appeal of city life and technological advancement creates tension within traditionally faithful families. Some abandon their heritage entirely. Yet Jared holds the community together through personal example and patient teaching. He demonstrates that faithfulness to divine calling brings deeper satisfaction than material prosperity. That relationship with God provides more security than human achievement. That the old ways preserve wisdom that innovation cannot replace. These silent generations serve crucial functions in divine history. They provide continuity between the dramatic spiritual breakthrough of Enosh's lifetime and the extraordinary spirituality of Enoch, who comes later. They maintain the sacred traditions during the long centuries when nothing spectacular happens. They prove that faithfulness does not require constant, miraculous intervention. Their lives teach important lessons about spiritual maturity. Young faith often needs dramatic experiences to sustain enthusiasm. Mature faith finds God in ordinary daily experience. These patriarchs worship consistently, whether or not they receive special revelations. They pray regularly, whether or not they witness miraculous answers. They remain faithful, whether or not their circumstances seem to reward their devotion. The length of their lives provides opportunity for deep spiritual development. Modern humans might accomplish much in 70 years. But these ancient humans had centuries to grow in wisdom and understanding, to observe patterns across multiple generations, to develop spiritual practices refined by hundreds of years of experience. Their longevity becomes a divine gift that enables spiritual achievements impossible in shorter lifespans. Their names, preserved in the sacred genealogies, ensure their contribution to divine history receives recognition. Though few stories survive about their specific actions, their names testify to their character and purpose. Future generations can see the unbroken chain of faithfulness that connects Seth to Noah. The steady transmission of divine memory across the centuries that separate Eden from the flood. Modern readers might find these silent generations boring compared to more dramatic biblical figures, but their quiet faithfulness makes possible everything that follows. Without their preservation of sacred traditions, Enoch would have no foundation for his prophetic ministry. Without their maintenance of divine memory, Noah would not recognize God's voice when judgment finally comes. They represent the majority of faithful believers throughout history. Most who serve God never perform miracles or receive special revelations. Most live ordinary lives marked by steady obedience rather than spectacular achievement. Most contribute to divine purposes through faithful daily choices rather than dramatic public ministry. The silent generations honor these ordinary heroes of faith. Enoch walks with God among Seth's descendants. One stands apart. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, lives differently than those around him. The ancient records state simply that he walked with God. These 4 words describe a life that breaks every conventional pattern, an existence that touches eternity while remaining fully human. Enoch begins life like any other child of Seth's line, born into the tradition of calling upon the Lord's name, raised on stories of Eden and promises of divine faithfulness, taught the genealogies that connect his family to Adam himself. Nothing in his early years suggests the extraordinary destiny that awaits him. But something changes when Enoch reaches adulthood. The birth of his son Methuselah marks a turning point in his spiritual development. The name Methuselah means, "When he dies, it shall come." This prophetic name suggests Enoch receives divine revelation about coming judgment. The birth of his son awakens prophetic insight that will define the rest of his life. From this moment forward, Enoch begins walking with God in ways unprecedented since Adam's expulsion from Eden. This walking involves more than occasional prayer or worship. It describes continuous divine communion, constant spiritual awareness, life lived in perfect harmony with divine will and purpose. The phrase "walked with God" appears rarely in ancient literature. Only two men received this description before the flood: Enoch and Noah. The Hebrew word for walking suggests movement toward a destination, progress along a predetermined path. Enoch's life becomes a journey deeper into divine relationship with each passing year. This walk requires extraordinary spiritual discipline. Enoch must align his thoughts with divine thoughts, his desires with divine desires, his actions with divine purposes. Every choice becomes opportunity for greater harmony or greater discord with the divine will. Every moment offers potential for deeper communion or spiritual retreat. The walking also demands increasing separation from worldly concerns. While others focus on accumulating wealth or building cities or developing technologies, Enoch invests his energy in spiritual pursuits. He studies divine character, contemplates divine purposes, seeks deeper understanding of divine truth. His priorities diverge radically from those of his contemporaries. Enoch develops prophetic abilities during his walk with God. He receives visions of future events, understanding of divine plans, revelation about spiritual realities hidden from ordinary human perception. These insights make him valuable counselor to those seeking divine guidance, but they also create distance between him and those who prefer comfortable ignorance. The ancient book of Enoch, though not included in the biblical canon, preserves traditions about his prophetic ministry. According to these sources, Enoch receives detailed revelations about angels and heavenly realms, about the corruption spreading through human society, about divine judgment planned for the wicked, about hope reserved for the righteous. These revelations show Enoch the cosmic scope of divine purposes. He sees beyond the immediate concerns of daily survival to eternal consequences of human choices. He understands how individual decisions affect spiritual realities in heavenly places. He recognizes the spiritual warfare underlying visible human conflicts. Enoch's walk with God also produces practical wisdom for earthly life. He learns divine principles for agriculture and animal husbandry, receives insight into natural phenomena that helps his community survive disasters, develops understanding of human nature that makes him effective counselor and judge. His spirituality enhances rather than diminishes his practical abilities. The relationship transforms Enoch's physical being as well as his spiritual nature. Extended communion with God affects his body in ways that prefigure resurrection reality. He begins to transcend normal human limitations. His aging process slows, his health improves, his strength increases rather than decreases with advancing years. Other members of Seth's line notice these changes in Enoch. They seek his counsel on spiritual matters. Ask him to interpret dreams and visions. Request his prayers for healing and guidance. Enoch becomes spiritual leader for the righteous community. His authority comes not from position or inheritance, but from obvious divine relationship. But Enoch's spiritual development creates tension with surrounding cultures. His prophetic messages challenge the growing wickedness in Cain's cities. His lifestyle contradicts the materialistic values becoming dominant among humans. His warnings about divine judgment seem fanatical to those who believe human progress makes divine intervention unnecessary. The opposition intensifies as Enoch's prophetic ministry grows bolder. According to ancient traditions, he preaches fearlessly about coming judgment. He calls on humans to repent from wickedness and return to divine worship. He warns that divine patience has limits and that consequences for sin will eventually arrive. These messages make him enemies among the powerful and influential. Yet Enoch continues his walk with God despite external opposition. His relationship with the divine becomes more precious than human approval. His confidence in divine truth grows stronger than his concern for personal safety. His commitment to prophetic ministry outweighs his desire for comfortable life. The walk culminates in unprecedented experience. After 365 years of increasing divine communion, Enoch's earthly existence ends in unique fashion. The ancient record states that God took him. He does not experience death like other humans. Instead, he receives translation directly from earthly life to heavenly existence. This translation serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates divine power over death itself. It provides hope for others that death need not be the final human destination. It preserves Enoch from the violent persecution that his prophetic ministry would eventually attract. It establishes him as heavenly witness to human events on earth. Enoch's disappearance creates profound impact on those who remain. His translation proves that his prophetic messages came from divine source. His extraordinary exit validates his claims about spiritual realities beyond physical perception. His absence leaves void that reminds the community of the divine relationship they too could pursue. The memory of Enoch's walk with God becomes inspiration for future generations. His example shows that intimate divine relationship remains possible even in a fallen world. His life demonstrates that humans need not accept spiritual mediocrity as their permanent condition. His translation promises that divine purposes extend beyond earthly existence into eternal realities. The Gnostic Seth, secret Messiah. Centuries after the biblical accounts were recorded, Seth emerges in new literature with radically different character. Gnostic writers of the early Christian era transform him from quiet patriarch into cosmic redeemer. They create elaborate mythologies that make Seth's central figure in spiritual salvation. These texts reveal more about Gnostic theology than historical Seth, but they demonstrate his enduring symbolic power. The Apocryphon of John presents Seth as divine emissary sent to counteract the work of false gods. In this Gnostic cosmology, the material world results from the mistakes of ignorant divine beings called archons. Humanity becomes trapped in physical bodies that obscure their true spiritual nature. Seth arrives to awaken chosen souls to their divine origins and guide them back to the spiritual realm. This Gnostic Seth bears little resemblance to the biblical patriarch. Instead of being Adam's third son, he becomes a spiritual principle that existed before material creation. His mission involves revealing secret knowledge rather than preserving sacred traditions. His followers seek escape from the physical world, rather than faithful living within it. The name Seth becomes symbol for spiritual awakening rather than historical genealogy. The Gospel of the Egyptians develops these themes further. It describes Seth as the great invisible spirit who generates divine light in opposition to material darkness. This text presents three appearances of Seth throughout history. First, as the original divine light. Second, as the revealer of hidden knowledge. Third, as the final redeemer who will complete the salvation process for spiritual seekers. According to this Gnostic mythology, Seth's true followers are scattered throughout history, but remain connected through their possession of special knowledge. They recognize their divine origins despite being trapped in material bodies. They seek liberation through understanding rather than faith. They consider themselves spiritually superior to ordinary humans who remain ignorant of their true nature. The Sethian Gnostics create elaborate ritual systems around Seth's supposed teachings. They develop baptismal ceremonies that claim to reproduce Seth's divine nature in human participants. They practice sacred meals that supposedly provide spiritual nourishment unavailable through ordinary food. They engage in meditation techniques designed to separate the soul from bodily concerns and reconnect it with divine light. These rituals reflect fundamental Gnostic beliefs about the nature of salvation. Physical actions cannot provide spiritual liberation in their view. Only secret knowledge can free the soul from material imprisonment. Seth becomes the great teacher who first revealed this knowledge and continues to transmit it to worthy recipients across the generations. The Gnostic texts also describe Seth's cosmic battle against the forces of ignorance and material bondage. He leads armies of light beings against the archons who created the physical world. This warfare takes place in spiritual dimensions invisible to ordinary human perception. Victory will come when enough souls awaken to their divine nature and escape material existence entirely. Sethian communities develop around these teachings throughout the Mediterranean world during the early centuries of the Christian era. They attract followers who feel alienated from mainstream religious traditions, who seek more esoteric spiritual experiences, who believe that salvation requires special knowledge unavailable to the masses. Seth's name provides ancient authority for their innovative theological ideas. These groups often blend Seth's mythology with other religious traditions. They incorporate elements from Greek philosophy, Egyptian mystery religions, Jewish mysticism, and Christian theology. Seth becomes part of syncretic systems that attempt to unite all spiritual wisdom into comprehensive worldviews. His biblical origins provide Jewish and Christian credibility, while his Gnostic development allows unlimited theological creativity. The historical connection between biblical Seth and Gnostic Seth remains tenuous at best. Gnostic writers use the name and basic genealogical information from Genesis, but create entirely new character and mythology around these borrowed elements. Their Seth serves Gnostic theological purposes rather than preserving ancient historical memories. Yet the Gnostic appropriation of Seth reveals something significant about his enduring spiritual appeal. Even heretical religious movements recognize Seth's symbolic power as the appointed replacement for Abel, as the founder of the righteous lineage, as the ancestor of those who call upon the divine name. They transform these qualities to serve their own purposes, but they cannot ignore Seth's fundamental importance in spiritual history. The Gnostic Seth also demonstrates how religious traditions evolve through reinterpretation across centuries and cultures. The simple biblical account of Seth's birth and genealogy becomes foundation for complex theological systems that would astonish the original authors. Religious symbols prove remarkably adaptable to new contexts and needs. Modern scholars study Gnostic Seth primarily for what these texts reveal about early Christian diversity and the development of alternative religious movements. The elaborate mythologies provide insight into Gnostic theology and practice. The ritual descriptions illuminate religious life in communities that existed alongside mainstream Christianity. The philosophical ideas show how ancient religious thinkers attempted to solve fundamental questions about human existence and divine reality. But for those interested in the historical like Seth, Gnostic literature provides more confusion than clarity. These texts reflect 2nd and 3rd century theological speculation rather than 1st millennium historical memory. They use Seth's name and basic biographical details as starting points for creative religious imagination, rather than attempts to preserve authentic ancient traditions. The contrast between biblical Seth and Gnostic Seth reveals the difference between historical narrative and theological symbolism. Biblical authors present Seth as a real person who lived in specific historical context and performed concrete historical functions. Gnostic authors use Seth as theological symbol that represents abstract spiritual principles and cosmic realities. Both approaches serve legitimate purposes within their respective religious communities. Biblical Seth provides genealogical foundation for the righteous lineage that culminates in Noah and eventually in Christ. Gnostic Seth provides theological framework for understanding spiritual awakening and salvation through knowledge. Neither tradition should be judged entirely by the standards of the other. The persistence of Seth's name across these diverse religious traditions testifies to his fundamental importance in human spiritual imagination. Whether understood as historical patriarch or cosmic principle, Seth represents hope for spiritual renewal in a fallen world. He embodies the possibility that divine purposes can survive human failure and continue working toward ultimate restoration. Seth in Jewish mysticism, Jewish tradition expands far beyond biblical narrative in its treatment of Seth. Rabbinic literature transforms him from simple patriarch into cosmic figure whose influence shapes all subsequent history. Mystical texts describe him as priest, scribe, and proto-messianic redeemer. These developments show how post-biblical Judaism understood Seth's significance for divine purposes. The Book of Jubilees provides early foundation for Seth's expanded role. This ancient text describes Seth as the first human to learn writing from angels. According to Jubilees, divine messengers teach Seth to record genealogies, preserve sacred traditions, and maintain astronomical knowledge. His writing becomes humanity's first attempt to preserve divine revelation in permanent form. This tradition makes Seth the inventor of human literacy. Before him, knowledge passed through oral transmission alone. Memory served as humanity's only library. But Seth receives divine inspiration to create written symbols that can preserve information across generations. His invention ensures that sacred truths survive even when human memory fails. Rabbinic sources describe Seth as the first priest in human history. They argue that his sacrifice to God established the patterns that later priests would follow. His offering techniques become models for proper worship. His understanding of divine requirements provides foundation for ritual systems that develop throughout Jewish history. Some traditions credit Seth with building the first altar for sacrifice. Others describe him as the first human to pray at regular times rather than only in crisis situations. Still others portray him as the first to teach children formal religious instruction. These various traditions agree that Seth initiated systematic religious practices that distinguish worship from mere superstition. Kabbalistic literature takes these themes much further. Mystical texts describe Seth as a divine soul incarnated in human form to rescue humanity from spiritual corruption. His birth represents intervention by higher spiritual forces to prevent human history from ending in complete failure. His life provides bridge between divine and human realms. According to these mystical traditions, Seth possesses knowledge of divine names that give him power to perform miracles. He understands the secret meanings of Hebrew letters. He can manipulate spiritual energies to heal disease and defeat demons. His wisdom encompasses both practical knowledge for earthly life and esoteric understanding of heavenly mysteries. The Zohar and related Kabbalistic texts describe Seth as the spiritual ancestor of all righteous souls throughout history. They teach that certain elevated souls are literally reincarnations of Seth's divine essence. These special souls carry forward his mission of preserving divine truth and combating spiritual darkness in each generation. This mystical genealogy makes Seth the spiritual father of prophets, sages, and righteous leaders across Jewish history. Moses receives some of Seth's divine essence. David carries forward Seth's royal authority. The Messiah will complete the mission that Seth began in the earliest generations of human existence. Some Kabbalistic traditions describe Seth as still living in hidden form somewhere on earth. Like Enoch and Elijah, he never truly died but continues to influence human affairs from concealment. Advanced spiritual seekers might encounter him in visions or dreams. His presence provides ongoing guidance for those who pursue divine wisdom. Other mystical sources locate Seth in the heavenly court, where he serves as advocate for humanity before the divine throne. His firsthand experience of human struggle makes him effective intercessor for those facing spiritual challenges. His righteousness provides merit that can protect less righteous humans from divine judgment. Medieval Jewish texts often describe Seth as the author of various ancient books of wisdom. They attribute to him works on astronomy, medicine, agriculture, and spiritual development. These books supposedly contain divine revelation that Seth received directly from angels or through prophetic visions. Though the actual texts have been lost, their wisdom continues to influence human development. The tradition of Seth as cosmic scribe extends beyond mere writing to include preservation of all important knowledge. He becomes humanity's first librarian, the keeper of information essential for human survival and spiritual development. Without his efforts, subsequent generations would have lost connection to their divine origins entirely. Some rabbinic sources describe Seth as the true inheritor of Adam's spiritual authority. While Cain received the curse and Abel died young, Seth inherited the divine blessing originally given to humanity in Eden. This blessing includes dominion over creation, understanding of divine purposes, and responsibility for human spiritual leadership. This inherited authority makes Seth the first king in spiritual sense, though not in political terms. His kingdom consists of those who choose righteousness over wickedness. His subjects are volunteers rather than conquered peoples. His rule operates through moral influence rather than physical force. Jewish mystical traditions also describe Seth's role in future messianic events. They teach that the Messiah will possess Seth's divine essence in fullness. The Messianic age will restore the conditions that existed during Seth's lifetime, when humans could communicate directly with divine messengers and live in harmony with creation. Some traditions describe specific signs that will announce the Messiah's arrival, including the discovery of Seth's lost books of wisdom. Others predict that Seth himself will return in physical form to prepare the way for messianic redemption. These prophecies reflect the enduring Jewish belief that Seth's mission remains incomplete until all creation experiences complete restoration. The persistence of these mystical traditions about Seth across centuries of Jewish development demonstrates his central importance in Jewish spiritual imagination. Even when historical details remain uncertain, his symbolic significance continues to inspire theological reflection and spiritual aspiration. Modern Jewish scholars study these mystical traditions primarily for their insight into post-biblical Jewish theology rather than for historical information about the ancient Seth. The elaborate developments show how Jewish thinkers used biblical figures as frameworks for exploring fundamental questions about divine purpose, human nature, and cosmic destiny. Yet even as theological symbols, these traditions preserve important truths about Seth's significance. They recognize his role as founder of the righteous lineage. They acknowledge his importance in preserving divine revelation. They honor his contribution to humanity's spiritual development. Whether understood literally or symbolically, Seth remains central to Jewish understanding of divine purposes in human history. The Book of Adam and Eve. Ancient storytellers expanded the brief biblical accounts of humanity's first family into elaborate narratives rich with detail and emotion. The life of Adam and Eve, also known as the Apocalypse of Moses, places Seth at the center of humanity's most profound experiences with death, hope, and divine mercy. These stories reveal how later generations understood Seth's role in the cosmic drama of fall and redemption. The narrative begins as Adam faces his final illness. For 9 centuries, he has carried the weight of introducing sin and death into human experience. Now mortality claims him as it claimed his son Abel before him. But Adam does not face death alone. Seth stands beside his father's bed, ready to serve in ways that will define his character for all time. Eve recognizes that Adam's end approaches and seeks some way to ease his suffering. She remembers the tree of life from Eden's garden. If she could obtain oil from that sacred tree, perhaps it could heal Adam's sickness or at least relieve his pain. This oil represents more than medicine. It symbolizes hope that divine mercy might yet reverse the curse of death. Seth volunteers for this impossible mission. He will journey to Eden's gates and request the oil of mercy from the angelic guardians. The task seems hopeless from human perspective. Eden remains sealed since his parents' expulsion. Cherubim with flaming swords guard every entrance. No human has approached those gates since the day of exile. But Seth's willingness to attempt the journey reveals his character. He does not calculate odds of success. He does not debate the theology of divine mercy. He simply responds to his father's need with whatever action remains possible. This readiness to serve, regardless of apparent futility, becomes hallmark of Seth's approach to life. The journey to Eden takes Seth through landscapes that still bear traces of paradise lost. Rivers that once watered the garden now flow beyond their ancient boundaries. Trees that once bore perfect fruit now struggle with thorns and disease. Animals that once lived in harmony now flee from human presence. Every mile reminds Seth of what humanity forfeited through disobedience. When Seth finally reaches Eden's boundary, he encounters the cherubim standing guard with their flaming swords. These angelic beings recognize him immediately. They know his genealogy, they understand his mission, but they also represent divine justice that cannot be compromised by human need or desire. The cherubim deliver God's message to Seth with mixture of judgment and hope. The oil of life cannot be granted now. Adam must face death as consequence of his choices. But this death is not final defeat. Someday, in the fullness of time, divine mercy will triumph over divine justice. The tree of life will again provide healing for humanity. The angels tell Seth about future events that will transform human destiny. They speak of one who will come to crush the serpent's head, of a resurrection that will conquer death itself, of new creation that will surpass even Eden's original glory. Seth receives these prophecies as precious treasure to carry back to his dying father. The message provides specific timing for these future hopes. After 5,500 years have passed, the promised deliverer will arrive. He will accomplish what the oil of life could have done temporarily. He will provide eternal healing for all who trust in divine mercy. Death will lose its sting, and the grave will lose its victory. Seth returns from Eden with empty hands but full heart. He cannot bring the oil his father needs, but he carries promises that transcend any temporary healing. The news of future redemption provides comfort that mere medicine could never supply. Hope proves more powerful than healing when eternal perspective replaces temporal concern. Adam receives Seth's report with peaceful acceptance. The divine message confirms what he has long suspected. Death must be accepted as just consequence for sin, but death need not be feared as final ending. Divine purposes extend beyond current circumstances into future realities that will vindicate divine goodness and fulfill divine promises. The dying Adam uses his remaining strength to teach Seth and his other children about their responsibilities as carriers of divine hope. They must preserve the promises Seth received at Eden's gates. They must maintain faith in divine mercy despite present sufferings. They must prepare future generations for the redemption that will eventually come. When Adam finally dies, Seth takes charge of burial arrangements. He prepares his father's body with reverent care. He selects appropriate burial site. He ensures that proper honors are paid to the man who first received divine image and will someday be restored to divine glory. The funeral becomes testimony to hope rather than surrender to despair. According to the ancient narrative, divine messengers appear at Adam's burial to demonstrate proper procedures for honoring the dead. They show Seth how to prepare bodies for burial in ways that acknowledge both human mortality and hope for resurrection. These techniques become standard practices for all subsequent generations. Seth also receives instructions about preserving Adam's body for future resurrection. Certain spices must be used. Specific burial positions must be maintained. The gravesite must be marked and protected. These requirements reflect belief that physical resurrection will require physical remains. Death interrupts human existence but does not destroy human identity. The story concludes with Seth assuming leadership of the human family. He becomes keeper of divine promises received at Eden's gates, guardian of hope for future redemption. Teacher of faith that transcends present circumstances. His character, shaped by his mission to Eden, enables him to guide humanity through the long centuries of waiting for promised deliverance. This ancient narrative transforms Seth from simple biblical figure into complex character, wrestling with ultimate questions about life, death, and divine purpose. His willingness to attempt impossible missions, his acceptance of disappointing answers, his commitment to preserving hope despite present suffering. These qualities make him suitable ancestor for all who must live by faith rather than sight. The oil of mercy that Seth could not obtain becomes symbol for the divine grace that will eventually be provided through different means. His unsuccessful journey to Eden prefigures the successful journey that the promised deliverer will someday make. His empty hands point forward to hands that will be filled with power to heal and save and restore. The cave of treasures high in the ancient mountains, beyond the reach of Cain's violent descendants, Seth discovers a sacred cavern that will shape human destiny for generations. The cave of treasures becomes more than shelter from storms or storage for valuable objects. It becomes sanctuary where divine purposes are preserved through humanity's darkest centuries. According to Eastern Christian traditions, this cave originates with Adam himself. Before his death, the first man receives divine revelation about treasures that must be preserved for future generations. Not gold or silver, though these have their place, but treasures of far greater value. Sacred relics that connect humanity to its divine origins and point toward its ultimate destiny. Adam entrusts these treasures to Seth because of his proven faithfulness. The journey to Eden's gates demonstrated Seth's reliability under pressure. His acceptance of divine will despite personal disappointment proved his spiritual maturity. His commitment to preserving hope despite present suffering marked him as suitable guardian for humanity's most precious possessions. The treasures themselves carry profound symbolic meaning. Gold represents divine glory that once filled Eden and will someday fill the earth again. Frankincense symbolizes prayers of the righteous, rising like incense before the divine throne. Myrrh prefigures the suffering through which redemption will eventually come. Together, these three substances tell the complete story of divine purpose in human history. But the cave holds more than symbolic metals and spices. Adam's own body rests there, preserved according to divine instructions for future resurrection. His physical remains serve as reminder that human identity includes material as well as spiritual dimensions. Death may separate soul from body temporarily, but divine purposes include restoration of complete human nature. Seth establishes careful protocols for accessing the cave and its treasures. Only certain individuals may enter. Only specific rituals may be performed there. Only approved purposes justify using the sacred objects. These restrictions protect the treasures from misuse while ensuring their availability for legitimate spiritual needs. The cave becomes pilgrimage destination for the righteous throughout the pre-flood era. Families journey from distant settlements to offer prayers at Adam's tomb, to seek divine guidance through contact with sacred objects, to teach their children about humanity's origins and destiny. The long, difficult journey itself becomes spiritual discipline that prepares hearts for divine encounter. Worship services in the cave follow patterns established by Seth under divine guidance. Songs that Adam learned in Eden echo through the cavern's chambers. Prayers that preserve divine names and attributes rise toward heaven through natural openings in the rock. Ceremonies that reenact divine promises provide hope for those facing present difficulties. The acoustic properties of the cave enhance these worship experiences. Voices carry farther and sound richer than in open air. Musical instruments produce deeper resonances. Even whispered prayers seem to gain power from the sacred space. The cave itself becomes instrument of worship that amplifies human devotion. Seth trains selected individuals to serve as guardians of the cave and its treasures. These caretakers commit their lives to preserving the sacred objects and maintaining proper worship practices. They memorize the stories associated with each treasure. They learn the rituals required for different spiritual needs. They prepare for the day when the treasures will fulfill their ultimate purpose. According to the tradition, these treasures will eventually travel to honor the promised deliverer. The gold will acknowledge his divine kingship. The frankincense will recognize his perfect priesthood. The myrrh will foresee his redemptive suffering. The cave serves as storage facility for gifts that will be presented centuries later at the Messiah's birth. The preservation of these treasures through flood and dispersion requires careful planning across generations. Each guardian must train reliable successors. Each generation must maintain the traditions and knowledge necessary for proper care. The responsibility passes from father to son through the righteous lineage that traces back to Seth himself. Genealogical records preserved in the cave document the transmission of this sacred trust through the centuries. Noah receives the treasures before the flood. Shem carries them through the post-flood world. Abraham's descendants maintain the tradition through their wanderings. The line of preservation parallels the line of divine promise through history. The cave also serves as library for preserving non-material treasures. Oral traditions that connect back to Eden itself, prophecies received through divine revelation, wisdom gained through centuries of faithful living. This knowledge proves as valuable as any physical object for maintaining human connection to divine purposes. Maps carved into the cave walls show the locations of other sacred sites, where Adam first offered sacrifice after leaving Eden, where Enoch walked with God before his translation, where divine appearances occurred to the righteous patriarchs. The cave becomes geographical center for understanding sacred history across the ancient world. Astronomical observations recorded in the cave provide practical knowledge for agriculture and navigation. The movements of stars and seasons that Adam observed in Eden continue in predictable patterns. Understanding these cycles helps Seth's descendants plan their activities in harmony with divine order built into creation itself. Medical knowledge preserved in the cave includes information about healing properties of various plants and minerals. Some of this wisdom comes from experience gained through trial and error, but some derives from divine instruction given to Adam about creation's healing potential. This knowledge serves the community's health needs while pointing toward ultimate healing through divine intervention. The cave's treasures also include tools and technologies that will be needed for future events. Instructions for building altars according to divine specifications, techniques for preparing sacrifices that please God, methods for constructing sacred objects that facilitate proper worship. This practical knowledge ensures continuity in religious practice across changing circumstances. During times of persecution, the cave provides refuge for the righteous who face violence from Cain's descendants. Its remote location and difficult access protect those who seek shelter there. Its sacred nature discourages enemies from pursuing fugitives into its depths. The treasures provide resources for sustaining refugees until danger passes. The tradition of the Cave of Treasures demonstrates how physical objects can serve spiritual purposes when properly understood and used. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh are valuable commodities in any age, but their greatest worth lies in their symbolic meaning and prophetic significance. They represent divine realities that transcend material value. Seth's role as guardian of these treasures establishes pattern for spiritual leadership that emphasizes service rather than power. He does not own the treasures for personal benefit. He preserves them for divine purposes that extend far beyond his own lifetime. His guardianship models the kind of stewardship that God expects from all who receive divine gifts and responsibilities. Ancient echoes, Seth and Egypt. Deep in the shadow of the pyramids, strange whispers echo through time. Ancient Egyptian texts speak of Set, the god of chaos and storms. Yet beneath this dark figure lies something more complex. Some scholars wonder if distant memories of Seth, son of Adam, somehow filtered into Egyptian myth across the centuries. The connections seem fragile at first. Set battles his brother Osiris in Egyptian lore, just as Seth's line stood apart from Cain's violent path. But where biblical Seth brought order and worship, Egyptian Set embodied discord. The names share similar sounds, yet their natures appear opposite. Ancient Egyptian records tell of foreign peoples entering the Nile Valley in earliest times. These newcomers brought stories, traditions, and memories of their ancestors. Among them may have been tales of the righteous son who replaced the fallen brother. Over generations, these stories transformed. What began as memory of Seth the faithful became Howd, Set the turbulent. The transformation follows a pattern seen throughout history. Sacred stories travel across cultures, changing shape as they move. The original Seth, quiet, faithful, chosen by God, enters new lands and new languages. Local customs reshape his image. Cultural needs redefine his purpose. Soon the peaceful son becomes something entirely different. Egyptian texts from the earliest dynasties hint at this process. They speak of ancient wisdom coming from the east, carried by wandering peoples. These groups settled in the delta regions, bringing their gods and stories with them. Their tales mixed with local beliefs, creating new myths from old truths. The timing aligns with biblical chronology in curious ways. If Seth's descendants spread across the ancient world before the flood, their stories would have survived in scattered forms. Egyptian civilization, rising after the Great Deluge, may have preserved these fragments in altered form. The righteous Seth became the chaotic Set through generations of retelling. Archaeological evidence supports this pattern of cultural mixing. Pre-dynastic Egyptian artifacts show influences from Mesopotamian regions where biblical events unfolded. Trade routes carried more than goods. They transported stories, beliefs, and memories of ancient times. Seth's legacy may have traveled these same paths, becoming Egyptian Set along the way. The contrast between biblical Seth and Egyptian Set reveals how stories adapt to serve different purposes. Egypt needed gods who explained conflict and justified royal power. The peaceful Seth would not suit these needs. Therefore, he became Set, still powerful, still significant, but serving Egypt's cultural requirements rather than preserving his original nature. Yet traces of the original Seth persist even in Egyptian myth. Set is not purely evil, but serves divine purposes within cosmic order. He protects the sun god's boat during its nightly journey through the underworld. This protective role echoes Seth's biblical function as guardian of the righteous line. Both figures, in their own ways, preserve something precious against dark forces. The linguistic connections grow stronger upon closer examination. Ancient Egyptian and Hebrew share common Semitic roots. Names and concepts cross between these languages more easily than modern scholars once believed. Seth's name could naturally become Set through normal phonetic changes over centuries of cultural contact. Other parallels emerge from careful study. Both Seth and Set are associated with divine appointment and special selection. Both stand apart from their brothers in significant ways. Both carry responsibilities that affect the entire cosmic order. These deeper similarities suggest genuine historical connections beneath surface differences. The Egyptian texts preserve one particularly striking detail. Set is sometimes called the Appointed One, a title that mirrors Eve's words when Seth was born. She declared that God had appointed another seed to replace Abel. This shared concept of divine appointment hints at common origins for both figures. Modern Egyptologists continue debating these connections. Some see pure coincidence in the similarities. Others argue for genuine historical links between biblical traditions and Egyptian mythology. The evidence allows for both interpretations, leaving room for wonder about how ancient stories traveled and transformed. What seems certain is that Seth's influence extended far beyond the pages of Scripture. His story, like ripples in still water, spread outward across the ancient world. Each culture it touched preserved some fragment of the original truth, even as it adapted that truth to local needs and understandings. The sons of God and the daughters of men. A darkness begins to creep across the earth. The line of Seth, once pure and separate, starts to weaken. Ancient texts describe a cosmic seduction that will doom the world. The sons of God look upon the daughters of men and find them beautiful. This simple phrase carries the weight of humanity's greatest catastrophe. The identity of these sons of God has puzzled scholars for millennia. Some traditions identify them as angels who abandoned their heavenly stations. Others see them as descendants of Seth who forgot their sacred calling. Both interpretations point to the same tragic result, the breakdown of divine order on earth. Seth's lineage had maintained its separation from Cain's violent descendants for generations. They dwelt apart in the mountains, close to God, preserving the memory of Eden and the hope of restoration. Their lives were marked by worship, righteousness, and divine communion. They were the appointed guardians of spiritual truth in a darkening world. But isolation breeds curiosity. As centuries passed, some among Seth's descendants began to wonder about life in the valleys below. There, Cain's children had built glittering cities filled with art, music, and technological marvels. Their women were beautiful, their culture sophisticated, their lives seemingly full of pleasure and ease. The temptation grew stronger with each generation. Young men from Seth's line would venture down from the sacred mountains. At first, they came only to trade or observe. They told themselves they would remain separate, untouched by the corruption below. They believed their righteousness would protect them from moral contamination. Gradually, the boundaries dissolved. Marriages began between the two lines. Seth's descendants, chosen to preserve divine truth, united themselves with those who had rejected God's ways. The ancient separation that had protected both bloodlines suddenly collapsed. Sacred and profane merged into something neither purely holy nor completely corrupt. The results exceeded anyone's worst fears. From these unions came children of unusual size and strength, beings the texts call Nephilim, or fallen ones. These giants inherited physical power from their mother's bloodline and spiritual knowledge from their father's heritage. They used both gifts for destruction rather than blessing. The Nephilim became warlords and tyrants. Their unnatural strength allowed them to dominate normal humans. Their inherited knowledge gave them access to secrets that should have remained hidden. They taught forbidden arts, sorcery, warfare, and technologies too dangerous for fallen humanity to possess. Violence multiplied across the earth under their influence. Divine knowledge meant to uplift and bless became a tool of oppression in their hands. They perverted worship into dark rituals. They turned healing arts into instruments of harm. They used their understanding of natural forces to terrorize and control. What God had intended for good became weaponized for evil. The corruption spread like a plague. Cities that had once produced beautiful art now created monuments to cruelty. Technologies that could have blessed humanity served only to enhance suffering. Even the earth itself seemed to revolt against the perverted order the Nephilim established. Natural disasters increased as creation groaned under the weight of cosmic rebellion. Seth's remaining descendants found themselves overwhelmed by the tide of corruption. Their small communities of faithful worshippers dwindled as more young people abandoned the mountains for the attractions below. The sacred traditions that had preserved divine truth for centuries began to fade. Knowledge of God grew dim as the light of righteousness flickered toward extinction. Yet not all was lost. A faithful remnant remained, led by figures like Enoch and later Noah. These few preserved the essential truths even as darkness engulfed the world around them. They maintained the sacred flame that would eventually kindle hope in a new world after judgment cleansed the old. The angelic interpretation of this story adds another layer of cosmic tragedy. If the sons of God were indeed heavenly beings, then their fall represents a catastrophe that transcended human failure. Angels who had witnessed divine glory chose earthly pleasure over eternal purpose. Their rebellion contaminated not just humanity, but the very boundary between heaven and earth. Ancient texts like the Book of Enoch elaborate on this cosmic disaster. They describe how fallen angels taught humans forbidden knowledge, the secrets of metallurgy for making weapons, cosmetics for enhancing beauty, astronomy for practicing magic. Each gift corrupted its recipient, leading humanity further from divine purpose into selfish ambition. The timing of this catastrophe proved crucial for human history. It occurred after centuries of growth and development, but before divine judgment could be forsaken. Humanity had advanced enough to make the corruption truly dangerous, but had not yet reached the point where redemption became impossible. The flood would arrive just as the last hope seemed ready to expire. This period represents the first great test of human nature under divine election. Seth's line had been chosen, blessed, and set apart. They possessed every advantage for maintaining righteousness. Yet they chose to abandon their calling for temporary pleasures. Their failure demonstrated that divine election alone could not guarantee faithfulness without continued submission to God's will. Warnings of the flood. The signs multiply across a darkening world. Prophets rise among the few who still remember God's voice. Their warnings echo through valleys where giants rule and corruption spreads like wildfire. The most faithful among Seth's descendants receive visions of coming judgment. Water will cover the earth. Only those who heed the warning will survive. Enoch stands as the greatest of these prophetic voices. His walks with God have shown him visions of cosmic justice. He sees the corruption that poisons creation and understands its inevitable end. His prophecies speak of divine wrath stored up for the ungodly. The earth itself cries out for cleansing from the violence that stains its soil. The prophet's words carry supernatural authority. When Enoch speaks, creation itself seems to listen. Birds fall silent. Winds cease their blowing. Even the Nephilim pause their violence when his voice rings across the land. Yet few truly understand the magnitude of what approaches. Most dismiss his warnings as the ravings of a mountain mystic. Ancient texts preserve fragments of these early prophecies. They speak of waters rising higher than the highest peaks. They describe a cosmic reset that will wash away every trace of current civilization. They promise salvation for the righteous while pronouncing doom upon the wicked. The specificity of these visions suggests divine revelation rather than human speculation. Enoch's prophetic ministry spans decades, growing more urgent as corruption increases. He travels from the sacred mountains down into the polluted valleys. His messages adapt to each audience while maintaining their essential truth. To the Nephilim, he proclaims coming judgment. To the remnant of Seth's line, he offers hope for preservation through obedience. The prophet's method of receiving revelation sets him apart from ordinary human experience. He does not merely hear God's voice, but walks in divine presence. These encounters transport him beyond normal reality into heavenly realms. There he witnesses the preparations for judgment already underway in cosmic courts of justice. His visions reveal the spiritual machinery behind coming destruction. Angels receive their commissions to execute divine wrath. Heavenly storehouses prepare the waters of judgment. Even the calendar of destruction becomes clear, though Enoch shares these specific details only with his most faithful followers. The content of Enoch's prophecies extends beyond simple warnings of flood. He describes the spiritual reasons for judgment. Humanity has corrupted the divine image through mingling with fallen beings. The earth has been polluted by innocent blood. Knowledge meant for blessing has been perverted into cursing. Creation itself demands cleansing. Yet mercy mingles with justice in these prophetic messages. Enoch speaks not only of destruction, but of preservation. A righteous remnant will survive the coming deluge. From them, God will rebuild human civilization on purer foundations. The flood represents not an ending, but a new beginning for humanity's relationship with the divine. Other prophets join Enoch's voice as the crisis deepens. Methuselah, his son, continues the prophetic tradition. His extraordinarily long life serves as a living sign of divine patience. As long as Methuselah lives, judgment remains delayed. His eventual death will signal that the time of grace has ended. The prophetic warnings grow more specific as the flood approaches. Enoch's visions reveal the chosen instrument of preservation. One man from Seth's pure lineage will receive divine instructions for survival. This chosen one will build a vessel capable of preserving life through the coming catastrophe. His obedience will determine whether humanity has any future at all. The prophecies also address the scope of coming judgment. The flood will be universal, covering every part of the inhabited earth. No mountain will remain above the waters. No refuge will escape the divine wrath. Only those within the divinely designed vessel will survive to see the new world that follows destruction. Enoch's final prophecies speak of what lies beyond the flood. The cleansed earth will receive a new covenant. Humanity will begin again with knowledge of divine justice. The memory of judgment will serve as warning for future generations. Yet the tendency toward corruption will remain, requiring continued vigilance and divine grace. The prophet's mysterious departure from earth serves as the ultimate validation of his message. God takes Enoch directly into divine presence without experiencing death. This translation demonstrates that the spiritual realities he proclaimed are genuine. His removal from earth also signals that the time for warnings is ending. Soon only judgment will remain. The scattered remnant of Seth's faithful descendants treasure these prophetic warnings. They share them in whispered conversations during the darkest hours. Some begin making practical preparations based on Enoch's visions. They gather supplies, strengthen their families, and intensify their worship. They sense that the old world is ending and a new one must soon begin. Yet, even among the faithful, doubt sometimes creeps in. Generations have heard warnings of coming judgment. Life continues its normal patterns despite prophetic urgency. The human heart struggles to comprehend catastrophe on the scale Enoch describes. This psychological resistance will make Noah's eventual obedience even more remarkable. Enter Noah. In the 10th generation from Adam, hope takes human form. Noah enters a world teetering on the edge of divine judgment. Born into Seth's faithful lineage, he carries within his blood the memory of Eden and the promise of redemption. His very name whispers of comfort and rest, qualities desperately needed in a time of cosmic upheaval. His father, Lamech, prophesies over the newborn child. This son will bring relief from the curse that has plagued the earth since Adam's fall. Through him, the ground will yield its increase again. The labor that has grown harsh under divine judgment will become bearable once more. These words prove more prophetic than anyone could imagine. Noah grows up hearing stories of the ancient days when men walked closer to God. His grandfather Methuselah, still alive after 9 centuries, remembers when the line of Seth maintained its separation from corruption. The old man's tales paint pictures of a purer time when divine presence felt near and righteousness seemed achievable. The young Noah witnesses the accelerating decay around him. Giants roam the valleys below his mountain home. Violence erupts daily in the cities of the plains. Even among his own people, fewer maintain the ancient ways of worship and separation. The darkness that Enoch prophesied continues to spread across the inhabited world. Yet something sets Noah apart from his contemporaries. While others drift toward compromise, he moves deeper into faithfulness. Where his generation abandons the old ways, he embraces them more fully. His righteousness stands out like a beacon in the gathering gloom. God takes notice of this solitary figure walking uprightly in a corrupt generation. The divine evaluation of Noah's character becomes crucial for humanity's survival. Scripture records that God finds him righteous in his generation, not perfect by absolute standards, but faithful among the unfaithful. His integrity preserves him when divine wrath consumes everyone else. His obedience qualifies him to become the new father of humanity after judgment cleanses the earth. Noah's righteousness manifests in practical ways. He maintains justice in his business dealings when others cheat and steal. He speaks truth when lies seem more profitable. He worships God alone while his neighbors bow to created things. His family life reflects divine order when chaos rules everywhere else. This moral consistency attracts divine attention at precisely the right moment. God needs a partner for the great work of preservation and renewal. The cosmic plan requires a human agent who can be trusted with enormous responsibility. Noah's proven character qualifies him for this unprecedented role in sacred history. The selection of Noah reveals divine methods in working through history. God rarely chooses the powerful or famous for the most important tasks. Instead, divine preference falls upon the faithful and obscure. Noah possesses no armies, rules no cities, commands no vast resources. He has only integrity, obedience, and willingness to trust divine instructions even when they seem impossible. His age, when chosen, 600 years old, speaks to divine patience and human longevity in the antediluvian world. Noah has had centuries to prove his character. His righteousness has been tested through long decades of watching corruption increase. He has remained faithful while others around him abandoned the ancient ways. The divine choice of Noah also demonstrates God's commitment to preserving the line of Seth. Despite widespread apostasy among the chosen lineage, God will not allow it to perish completely. One faithful man becomes the bridge between the old world and the new. Through him, the promises made to Seth will survive the coming catastrophe. Noah's selection carries enormous responsibility. Upon his obedience hangs the survival of every living creature. His willingness to follow divine instructions, no matter how strange they seem, will determine whether humanity has any future. The weight of this calling would crush an ordinary man. Noah's exceptional character enables him to bear it. The timing of Noah's calling proves crucial. He receives his divine commission just as corruption reaches its peak. The Nephilim have established their dominion over most of the earth. Violence fills the land from one end to the other. The few remaining righteous people feel overwhelmed by the tide of evil. Into this desperate situation, God speaks to his chosen servant. The initial divine communication to Noah must have seemed both terrifying and wonderful. After generations of increasing silence from heaven, God speaks clearly again. The voice that walked with Adam in Eden, that accepted Abel's sacrifice, that translated Enoch into glory, now addresses Noah directly. The intimacy of this communication validates Noah's lifelong faithfulness. God's message to Noah combines warning with promise. Judgment is coming upon the earth, but preservation is also planned. Destruction will be universal, but salvation will be provided for those who obey divine instructions. The old world will end, but a new world will begin. Noah stands at the hinge point between two eras of human history. The divine plan revealed to Noah demonstrates both justice and mercy. Justice demands that corruption be cleansed from creation. Mercy provides a way for life to continue beyond judgment. Noah becomes the instrument through which both divine attributes find expression. His obedience enables God to be both just and merciful simultaneously. The building of the ark, God speaks with mathematical precision. The vessel must measure 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. 3 decks, 1 window, 1 door. The specifications flow from divine wisdom, perfectly calculated for the task ahead. Noah receives blueprints that no human mind could have devised. Every measurement serves a purpose in the grand design of preservation. The instructions seem impossible at first. Build a ship where no large body of water exists. Construct a floating zoo in a world that has never seen such rain. Stock provisions for creatures that have never needed rescue. The project appears to be madness to anyone observing from the outside, yet Noah begins without hesitation or question. The work demands resources beyond any individual's normal means. Massive timbers must be harvested from distant forests. Pitch must be gathered to waterproof the enormous hull. Tools must be forged for construction on this unprecedented scale. Noah's family contributes labor, but the project requires divine provision to succeed. Decades pass as the great vessel slowly takes shape. Noah ages from 600 years toward his date with destiny. His hands grow calloused from constant construction work. His back bends under the weight of countless timber loads. Yet his determination never wavers. He builds as one who has heard the voice of the Almighty. The physical challenges pale beside the emotional burden. Neighbors mock the strange ship rising in their midst. Former friends question Noah's sanity. Even some family members wonder if the old man has lost his mind. The ridicule grows louder with each passing year as the ark grows larger and the promised flood fails to appear. Noah's faithfulness during this period demonstrates the depth of his trust in divine revelation. He continues building when evidence suggests folly. He persists when mockery becomes persecution. He maintains hope when natural circumstances offer no support for his actions. His obedience transcends human reason and rests purely on divine promise. The construction process teaches Noah about divine methods. God could have created the ark instantly through miraculous power. Instead, the divine plan requires human cooperation and decades of faithful work. The building period serves as a time of preparation for both Noah and the watching world. It offers opportunity for repentance that goes largely ignored. As the ark nears completion, its massive size becomes undeniable. The vessel dwarfs any structure previously built by human hands. Its proportions suggest purposes beyond normal understanding. Thoughtful observers begin to wonder if Noah might actually know something they have missed. Yet, most continue to dismiss the project as elaborate delusion. The ark's design reveals divine engineering beyond human capabilities. Its dimensions provide optimal stability for riding out violent storms. Its compartment system allows for efficient organization of countless animal species. Its ventilation system ensures adequate air circulation throughout the vessel. Every detail reflects supernatural wisdom applied to natural principles. Noah's family becomes his primary workforce as the project progresses. His sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth contribute their strength to the massive undertaking. Their wives help prepare the interior spaces and gather supplies. The whole family unit commits to the divine mission despite social pressure to abandon the seemingly impossible task. The waterproofing process requires special attention. The vessel must remain tight against waters more violent than any ship has ever faced. Pitch covers every joint and seam. Multiple coats ensure complete protection against the coming deluge. Noah understands that any leak could prove fatal to the precious cargo he will carry. Years of construction develop Noah's skills as a master craftsman. He learns techniques for working with massive timbers. He masters the art of creating watertight joints. He develops systems for moving heavy materials efficiently. The project transforms him from farmer to shipwright through necessity and divine guidance. The ark's completion approaches as Noah celebrates his 600th birthday. Every plank fits perfectly in its appointed place. Every joint holds firm against stress testing. Every compartment stands ready to receive its designated occupants. The vessel represents 6 decades of faithful obedience crystallized into physical form. Divine timing proves perfect in every detail. The ark reaches completion just as corruption on earth reaches its peak. Noah finishes his building just as God's patience reaches its end. The vessel stands ready just as the moment for judgment arrives. Human obedience and divine justice converge at precisely the right moment. The completed ark serves as a monument to faith in an age of skepticism. It demonstrates that divine commands, however strange they may seem, deserve absolute obedience. It proves that God's promises remain true even when circumstances suggest otherwise. It stands as witness that divine wisdom surpasses human understanding in every generation. Local inhabitants continue their normal activities despite the massive ship in their midst. They plant crops for harvests they will never reap. They make plans for futures that will never arrive. They ignore the clearest possible warning of coming judgment. Their blindness to obvious signs reveals how completely corruption has darkened human understanding. Noah's building project transforms from act of faith into instrument of salvation. What began as obedience to seemingly impossible divine commands becomes the vessel that preserves life through catastrophic judgment. The ark represents the principle that divine instructions, however strange they appear, always serve purposes beyond human comprehension. The deluge rain begins to fall, not the gentle showers that water the earth in normal times, but drops that strike like hammers against the ark's sealed deck. The sky darkens until day becomes indistinguishable from night. What starts as unusual weather quickly reveals itself as something far more catastrophic. The fountains of the great deep burst open. The windows of heaven swing wide. Water descends from above while simultaneously erupting from below. Noah and his family huddle inside the vessel that has been their obsession for decades. The sounds outside grow terrifying. Water pounds against the ark's sides with increasing fury. The great ship begins to move, lifted by rising floods from its dry resting place. For the first time since construction began, the massive vessel serves its intended purpose. The waters rise with supernatural speed. Valleys fill first, then hills disappear beneath the swelling flood. The cities of the plains, with all their violence and corruption, vanish under divine judgment. The giants who terrorize the earth find their great strength useless against the relentless tide. Everything that breathes air begins to perish as the water level continues climbing. Inside the ark, Noah's family experiences terror mixed with vindication. Their decades of faith now prove justified, but at an almost unbearable cost. Through the single window, they witness the destruction of everything familiar. The world they knew dissolves into chaos and death. Only their obedience to divine command preserves them from sharing the common fate. The animals within the ark sense the cosmic upheaval around them. Creatures that would normally flee from predators huddle together in shared terror. The divine peace that brought them to Noah maintains order within the vessel, even as chaos reigns outside. Their survival depends entirely on the floating sanctuary God designed for this moment. 40 days of rain represents only the beginning. The waters continue rising long after the initial deluge ends. Every mountain peak disappears beneath the universal flood. The highest hills become unmarked graves. The earth transforms into a boundless ocean, with no visible landmarks remaining. The old world has been erased completely. The psychological pressure on Noah's family grows almost unbearable. They are the sole human survivors of a cosmic catastrophe. Everyone they have ever known outside their immediate family has perished. The isolation feels complete and terrifying. They float alone on an endless sea, trusting only in divine promise that dry land will someday reappear. Months pass in this aquatic wilderness. The ark becomes their entire universe, holding all remaining life on Earth. Day follows day, with no change in the endless water stretching to every horizon. Time seems suspended between the world that was and the world that might yet be. They exist in a liminal space between destruction and recreation. The physical challenges of life aboard the ark multiply as weeks become months. Food supplies require careful rationing. Animal waste must be managed despite cramped quarters. Fresh water becomes precious despite the flood surrounding them. Every aspect of survival demands constant attention and divine provision. Divine remembrance breaks the stalemate. God remembers Noah and every living creature with him in the ark. This remembrance triggers cosmic forces that reverse the flood's progress. A wind begins to blow across the waters. The fountains of the deep close their mouths. The windows of heaven shut tight. The universal sea begins its slow recession. The ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat after 150 days afloat. The gentle bump against solid ground brings the first hope that their ordeal might be ending. Yet water still covers the earth as far as they can see. Land exists somewhere beneath the flood, but whether it will ever reappear remains uncertain. Noah sends out birds to test the waters. A raven flies back and forth, finding no resting place. A dove returns empty-handed on its first mission. 7 days later, the same dove brings back an olive leaf, the first proof that vegetation has begun to recover. 7 more days pass before the dove fails to return, indicating that suitable habitat has been restored. The long confinement finally ends after more than a year inside the ark. Noah removes the covering and sees dry ground stretching away from their mountain refuge. The earth appears vastly different from the world they remember. The familiar landmarks have been erased. New geography has emerged from beneath the receding waters. They must learn to live in a transformed creation. The first act after leaving the ark sets the tone for the new world. Noah builds an altar and offers sacrifices from the clean animals. The sweet savor rises before God like incense, carrying gratitude for preservation and prayers for divine blessing on the fresh start. This worship establishes the proper relationship between creator and creature in the post-flood world. Divine response to Noah's sacrifice establishes new principles for the continuing world. God promises never again to destroy the earth by flood. The rainbow appears as a sign of this covenant, visible to every generation that follows. The seasons will continue their regular cycle. Seed time and harvest will not cease while earth endures. Yet the flood changes more than geography. The antediluvian world of long lives and direct divine communication has ended. Human lifespans begin their steady decline from centuries to decades. The intimacy between heaven and earth, damaged by original sin and shattered by corruption, will not be fully restored until a greater salvation comes. The judgment of the flood demonstrates both divine justice and mercy. Justice demands that corruption be cleansed from creation. Mercy provides salvation for those who trust divine promises. Noah and his family bridge the gap between the world that deserved judgment and the world that receives a second chance. Through them, humanity gains opportunity to begin again. Aftermath and new beginnings. The earth lies empty and silent. Waters have receded, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean of its former corruption. Noah's family stands alone on Mount Ararat, 8 souls who must now rebuild human civilization from nothing. The task seems overwhelming. They possess no cities, no accumulated knowledge, no established customs. Everything must begin again from the ground up. God speaks into this pristine emptiness with words of blessing and commission. The divine mandate given to Adam echoes again for Noah and his descendants. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over every living creature. The original purpose for humanity remains unchanged despite the catastrophic interruption of the flood. Yet subtle changes mark this new beginning. Death enters the natural order more fully than before. Animals will now fear humans as never in the past. The permission to eat meat acknowledges that violence has become part of the natural cycle. The Rainbow Covenant promises no more universal floods, but also recognizes that such devastating judgment became necessary. Noah's first act establishes worship as the foundation of the new world. The altar built from stones gathered on the mountain becomes humanity's first religious structure after the flood. Smoke from burning sacrifices rises into the cleansed atmosphere, carrying prayers of gratitude and requests for divine blessing. This priority of worship sets the proper order for everything that follows. The practical challenges of survival demand immediate attention. Food must be found or grown in a landscape transformed by flood. Shelter must be built from whatever materials the devastated earth provides. Animals must be allowed to multiply and spread across the empty continents. The work of repopulating and rebuilding begins immediately. Noah plants a vineyard in the new world, seeking to restore some familiar comfort from the old. The vines grow in soil enriched by the organic matter of a drowned civilization. When harvest time arrives, Noah tastes wine for the first time since entering the ark. Perhaps overcome by relief at survival or seeking to forget the horrors he witnessed, he drinks too much and falls into a shameful stupor. This incident reveals that human nature survived the flood unchanged. The corruption that made judgment necessary remains present in the hearts of the saved. Noah's righteousness preserved him through catastrophe, but did not transform him into perfect virtue. The new world will face the same moral challenges that destroyed the old. Ham's response to his father's nakedness demonstrates how quickly sin reasserts itself. Instead of covering Noah's shame with discretion, Ham exposes it to his brothers. This act of dishonor toward his father echoes the disrespect that characterized the pre-flood world. The pattern of corruption begins repeating within a single generation of salvation. Shem and Japheth handle the situation with proper honor. They walk backward to cover their father without looking upon his shame. This respectful behavior earns them blessing, while Ham's line receives prophetic judgment. Even in the New World, choices about honor and dishonor carry lasting consequences for entire family lines. Noah's prophetic words over his 3 sons shape the future development of human civilization. Shem receives blessing as the one through whom divine purpose will continue. Japheth will expand and dwell in Shem's tents, suggesting partnership and blessing. Ham's descendant Canaan faces servitude, indicating the cost of dishonoring one's father and, by extension, divine authority. The covenant established with Noah extends beyond his immediate family to encompass all creation. God promises never again to destroy the earth by flood, regardless of human behavior. This unilateral commitment ensures stability for the natural order. Seasons will continue their cycles. The earth will remain fertile. The basic conditions for civilization are guaranteed. The rainbow serves as a visible sign of this cosmic covenant. Every time storm clouds gather and threaten destructive rain, the multicolored arc appears as a reminder of divine restraint. Children in every generation will see this sign and hear the story of judgment survived through divine mercy. The visual reminder preserves the memory of both flood and salvation. Human lifespans begin their gradual decline in the post-flood world. Noah lives 950 years, nearly matching pre-flood longevity, but his descendants experience steadily shorter lives. This change may result from environmental differences in the new world, or it may represent divine mercy limiting exposure to a fallen existence. Either way, the change marks a definitive break between the old world and the new. The dispersion of Noah's family across the earth fulfills the divine command to fill and subdue it. From the mountains of Ararat, they spread in all directions. Each group carries memories of the flood and the covenant that followed. These stories become the foundation myths of civilizations around the world, preserving echoes of the great judgment and salvation. Archaeological evidence suggests rapid climate change following some ancient catastrophic event. Ice ages shift, sea levels adjust, continental configurations stabilize into their current forms. While these changes might have natural explanations, they align remarkably well with the biblical account of a world-transforming flood, followed by gradual recovery. The new world offers humanity a clean slate, but also carries forward the lessons of the old. Divine justice cannot be mocked indefinitely. Corruption carries consequences that eventually demand reckoning. Yet divine mercy provides salvation for those who trust and obey. These truths, learned through catastrophe, guide human behavior in the centuries that follow. Cultural memories of the Great Flood persist in civilizations worldwide. From Mesopotamian epics to Native American traditions, stories of cosmic judgment by water appear in nearly every human culture. These widespread accounts suggest common memory of an actual historical event preserved in oral tradition across the centuries of human dispersion from a common source. Seth's legacy through Shem. Among Noah's three sons, Shem carries forward the most sacred inheritance. His name means name or reputation, suggesting the honor that will flow through his lineage. The blessing pronounced over him by his father designates him as the vessel through which divine purpose will continue. In Shem, the spiritual DNA of Seth finds its post-flood expression. The genealogical records trace divine promise through Shem's descendants with careful precision. From him comes Arpachshad, then Shelah, then Eber, whose name gives rise to the designation Hebrew. Each generation maintains the sacred connection despite the challenges of rebuilding civilization in a transformed world. The line of promise survives both flood and the cultural pressures of new surroundings. Shem's descendants settle in the regions east of the Mediterranean in lands that will later become known as Mesopotamia and Canaan. Their choices of location prove providential, placing them at the crossroads of ancient trade routes. From these strategic positions, the influence of Seth's spiritual legacy can spread throughout the developing world. The Tower of Babel incident tests Shem's lineage in ways reminiscent of the pre-flood corruption. Humanity unites in rebellion against divine command to spread across the earth. Instead of filling and subduing the world, they gather to build a monument to their own glory. The Great Tower represents the same pride that characterized Cain's descendants before the flood. Divine intervention scatters the would-be tower builders through confusion of languages. This judgment preserves the earth from a premature unity based on rebellion rather than righteousness. Shem's descendants, presumably maintaining their faithfulness to divine commands, receive their own language and territory. They carry forward the memory of true worship while other groups drift into idolatry. The cultural transmission through Shem's line preserves essential truths that might otherwise be lost. Stories of creation, fall, flood, and covenant pass from father to son across the generations. These oral traditions maintain their accuracy through careful repetition and deep reverence for ancestral wisdom. The spiritual inheritance proves more valuable than material wealth. Shem himself lives 500 years after the flood, long enough to see his descendants spread across vast territories. His extended lifespan allows him to serve as a living link between the pre-flood world and the emerging civilizations of the new earth. His memories of the ancient corruption and divine judgment provide warning for future generations. The genealogical records show a steady decline in lifespans among Shem's descendants. Where Noah lived nearly a millennium, his great-great-grandson, Peleg, sees only 2 centuries and 39 years. This gradual shortening of life may reflect environmental changes in the post-flood world, or it may represent divine mercy limiting exposure to a fallen existence. 10 generations after Noah, Abraham emerges from Shem's lineage in the city of Ur. His call from divine voice marks a crucial turning point in the preservation of Seth's spiritual legacy. Through Abraham, the scattered memory of true worship will be gathered into a chosen people. The promise given to Seth will find new expression in the covenant with Abraham and his descendants. The timing of Abraham's call proves significant. It occurs when the memory of the flood has begun to fade. Idolatry spreads across the earth as people forget the lessons of divine judgment. Even in Mesopotamia, where memories should be strongest, the worship of false gods displaces reverence for the true Creator. Abraham's faithfulness shines like a beacon in gathering darkness. Abraham's willingness to leave his homeland echoes the separation that characterized Seth's line from the beginning. Just as Seth's descendants had once dwelt apart from Cain's corrupt civilization, Abraham separates himself from the idolatrous culture of his birth. He becomes a wanderer in obedience to divine call, trusting promises that seem impossible to fulfill. The covenant established with Abraham renews and expands the promises implicit in Seth's appointment. Abraham will become the father of nations. His descendants will be as numerous as stars in the sky. Through his lineage, all families of the earth will receive blessing. These magnificent promises echo and amplify the hope that began with Seth's birth after Abel's death. Isaac's birth to elderly parents demonstrates divine power to fulfill impossible promises. Just as Seth had replaced the murdered Abel, Isaac replaces the son of promise who seemed impossible to conceive. The pattern of divine provision continues across the centuries, showing that God's purposes cannot be thwarted by natural limitations or human failure. The near sacrifice of Isaac tests Abraham's faith in ways that echo the trials faced by Seth's lineage throughout history. Abraham must choose between natural affection and divine command. His willingness to offer his son demonstrates the same trust that enabled Noah to build an ark on dry ground. Faithfulness to divine revelation transcends human understanding or preference. Jacob's wrestling with the angel and his transformation into the one who strives with God continues the spiritual journey that began with Seth. Like his forefather, who was appointed to replace a fallen brother, Jacob receives a new name and identity through divine encounter. His 12 sons become the patriarchs of a chosen nation that will preserve divine truth for all humanity. The story of Joseph demonstrates how divine providence works through apparent disaster to accomplish redemptive purpose. His brother's jealousy leads to slavery in Egypt, yet this seeming catastrophe positions him to save his family from famine. The pattern reflects the larger story of Seth's line. Apparent setbacks serve divine purposes that become clear only in retrospect. The preservation of Jacob's family in Egypt during the Great Famine ensures the survival of Seth's spiritual legacy at a crucial moment. Without Joseph's administrative wisdom and Pharaoh's favor, the chosen lineage might have perished. Divine providence protects the carriers of promise, even when they are unaware of the larger purpose being served. The multiplication of Jacob's descendants in Egypt fulfills the promise of numerous offspring while also creating conditions for future deliverance. Their growth from 70 souls to perhaps 2 million people demonstrates divine faithfulness to the covenant. Yet their eventual bondage also reveals that earthly circumstances cannot guarantee security. Only divine grace provides ultimate protection. Moses emerges from this enslaved population as the next great link in Seth's spiritual chain. His encounter with the burning bush echoes the divine communications that guided Enoch, Noah, and Abraham. The God who speaks to Moses identifies himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the same divine voice that has guided Seth's lineage throughout history. The Exodus from Egypt represents the most dramatic demonstration of divine power since the flood. Through Moses, God delivers his chosen people from bondage and establishes them as a nation. The law given at Mount Sinai codifies the moral truths that Seth's descendants had preserved through oral tradition. Written revelation supplements the spiritual inheritance passed down through generations of faithful families. From Seth to Christ, the Gospel of Luke traces an unbroken line from Adam through Seth down to Jesus of Nazareth. This genealogical thread weaves through 77 generations, connecting the appointed son of Eve to the promised Messiah. Every name represents a link in the chain of divine purpose that began when Seth replaced the murdered Abel. Luke's careful documentation serves more than historical interest. The evangelist demonstrates that Jesus belongs to the legitimate spiritual lineage that has carried divine promise since the beginning. Through Seth's line, the hope of redemption has been preserved across millennia. In Christ, that ancient hope finds its ultimate fulfillment. The theological significance of this connection runs deeper than mere ancestry. Seth was appointed to replace Abel after Cain's violence destroyed the first attempt at righteous worship. Christ comes to replace Adam after sin destroyed humanity's original relationship with God. Both figures serve as divine appointments to restore what was lost through human failure. Early Christian writers recognized these parallels with profound insight. They saw Seth as a type of Christ, a figure whose life and purpose foreshadowed the greater salvation to come. Where Seth preserved physical life through the flood, Christ preserved spiritual life through judgment. Where Seth's descendant Noah saved a remnant in the ark, Christ saves believers through his cross. The timing of Christ's appearance fulfills the same pattern of divine patience and intervention seen throughout Seth's lineage. Just as Noah appeared when corruption reached its peak, Christ enters history when spiritual darkness seems complete. Roman occupation, religious hypocrisy, and moral decay create conditions ripe for divine intervention. Christ's genealogy through Seth also emphasizes his full humanity. He shares the same flesh and blood as every person descended from Adam through the appointed line. This genuine human nature qualifies him to serve as substitute for human sin. Only one who truly belongs to the race can represent the race before divine justice. Yet Christ transcends his genealogical inheritance in crucial ways. Where every descendant of Seth carried the stain of original sin, Christ remains sinless through divine conception. Where Seth's lineage preserved truth through human tradition, Christ embodies truth as the eternal Word made flesh. Where previous generations waited for promised salvation, Christ provides that salvation through his own sacrifice. The virgin birth preserves the Sethite lineage while transcending its limitations. Mary belongs to Seth's line through her ancestry, but the Holy Spirit provides the divine nature that ordinary human generation cannot supply. Christ inherits the promises given to Seth's descendants while possessing the divine power necessary to fulfill them completely. The ministry of Christ demonstrates the same patterns that characterized Seth's lineage throughout history. He separates himself from the corrupt religious establishment of his day, just as Seth's descendants maintained their distinction from Cain's violent civilization. He preserves and teaches divine truth in the face of opposition, continuing the faithful transmission that began with the appointed Son. Christ's teaching method often employs stories and parables that echo the oral traditions of Seth's lineage. The careful preservation of divine truth through memorable narratives continues in his ministry. The disciples who receive these teachings become the next link in the chain of spiritual transmission that stretches back to Seth himself. The crucifixion of Christ parallels Abel's murder in reverse. Where Cain unlived his brother out of jealousy and hatred, Christ willingly gives his life out of love and obedience. Where Abel's blood cried out for vengeance, Christ's blood speaks of mercy and forgiveness. The pattern of innocent suffering is transformed from tragedy into triumph. The resurrection demonstrates divine power to overcome the death that has plagued Seth's lineage since Adam's fall. Every descendant of the appointed son has eventually succumbed to mortality despite their faithfulness. Christ breaks this pattern by rising from death through divine power. His victory over the grave opens the same possibility for all who trust in him. The ascension of Christ echoes Enoch's translation while surpassing it in scope and significance. Enoch walked with God and was taken up without seeing death as a reward for individual faithfulness. Christ ascends as the representative of all humanity, opening the way for others to follow. His exaltation makes possible the spiritual transformation of entire human race. The promised return of Christ will complete the restoration that began with Seth's appointment. Where the flood cleansed the earth of physical corruption, the final judgment will purge all moral evil from creation. Where Noah's family began the world anew after the deluge, believers will inherit a completely renewed earth after Christ's return. The church continues Seth's role as preserver of divine truth in a corrupt world. Just as the appointed son's lineage maintained faith through the darkest periods of history, Christian communities guard and transmit gospel truth despite opposition and persecution. The same faithfulness that characterized Seth's descendants now marks Christ's followers. The Great Commission extends the missionary impulse that began with Seth's birth. Where the appointed son's lineage preserved truth for their descendants, believers now carry that truth to every nation and tribe. The blessing promised through Abraham's seed finds global expression through the gospel proclaimed by Christ's disciples. The hope that sustained Seth's lineage through flood, dispersion, bondage, and exile now sustains believers awaiting Christ's return. The same divine faithfulness that preserved the spiritual seed through millennia of human history continues to work in the lives of those who follow the ultimate descendant of the appointed Son. In Christ, the story that began with Seth reaches its intended climax and completion, the forgotten son who saved the world. History remembers the conquerors, the builders, the kings who shaped nations with sword and crown. Their names echo through monuments and myths, carved in stone and celebrated in song. Yet the greatest hero of human history remains largely forgotten. A quiet son who never built an empire, never won a battle, never even raised his voice above a whisper. Seth saved the world not through strength but through faithfulness. His appointment came in humanity's darkest hour. Death had entered paradise through deception. The first murder had stained the earth with innocent blood. God's image-bearers faced extinction before they had barely begun to multiply. In this crisis, divine mercy provided another seed, a replacement for the righteous son whose life was cut short by jealous rage. Seth accepted his role without fanfare or self-promotion. He never demanded recognition for carrying such enormous responsibility. The survival of the human race depended on his faithfulness, yet he went about his daily life with quiet devotion to duty. He married, raised children, worked the ground, and worshipped God, ordinary activities that served extraordinary purposes. The spiritual DNA he preserved proved more valuable than any earthly treasure. While his contemporary descendants built impressive cities and developed remarkable technologies, Seth maintained something far more precious: the memory of divine fellowship and the hope of restored relationship. His legacy lay not in what he accomplished, but in what he transmitted. Each generation of his lineage faced the same choice that confronted Seth himself: remain faithful to divine calling or drift toward the attractions of worldly success. Some, like Enoch and Noah, rose to exceptional heights of righteousness. Others maintained a quiet faithfulness that preserved the sacred tradition without dramatic demonstration. All contributed to the long chain of spiritual transmission. The preservation of truth through Seth's line required constant vigilance against corruption. The temptations that eventually overwhelmed most of humanity pressed equally against the appointed lineage. Cultural pressures encouraged compromise. Intermarriage with corrupt families offered short-term advantages. Yet, enough remained faithful to keep the divine flame burning through the darkest centuries. Seth's method of world saving reveals divine preference for spiritual rather than political solutions. God could have prevented human corruption through irresistible force or overwhelming displays of power. Instead, the divine plan worked through faithful families who preserved truth and transmitted hope across generations. The seemingly weak method proved stronger than any army. The flood demonstrated both the success and the limitation of Seth's mission. His spiritual descendants provided the remnant through which human civilization continued after divine judgment. Yet even that righteous remnant carried within themselves the seeds of future corruption. The problem of human nature required a more complete solution than mere preservation of a faithful lineage. Seth's role as bridge between the old world and the new finds its ultimate expression in Christ's genealogy. The line that began with the appointed son reaches its climax in the ultimate appointed son, Jesus, whose divine nature provides what human faithfulness alone could never achieve. Seth preserved the lineage, Christ redeems it completely. The pattern established by Seth continues in every generation of believers. Faithful parents transmit spiritual truth to their children. Righteous communities preserve divine revelation against cultural pressures to conform. Ordinary people living quiet lives of obedience contribute to purposes they may never fully understand. The method that saved the world through Seth continues saving it today. Modern believers often overlook Seth because his story lacks dramatic action. No miraculous signs mark his ministry. No spectacular victories vindicate his choices. No immediate transformation validates his faithfulness. Yet his patient obedience across nearly a millennium of life accomplished more than any military campaign or political movement ever could. The Forgotten Son teaches that divine purposes work through steady faithfulness rather than spectacular achievement. God seldom calls ordinary people to extraordinary exploits. More often, the divine plan requires simple obedience to clear commands over long periods of time. The accumulation of faithful choices across generations accomplishes what single dramatic gestures cannot. Seth's legacy challenges contemporary assumptions about significance and success. Modern culture celebrates innovation, achievement, and personal advancement. Seth's example suggests that preservation may be more important than progress, faithfulness more valuable than fame, transmission more significant than transformation. His quiet heroism questions whether today's heroes truly deserve their status. The appointed son also demonstrates the power of divine grace to work through imperfect people. Seth was not sinless like Christ or translated like Enoch. He lived an ordinary human life marked by the same struggles and limitations that affect everyone born after Adam's fall. Yet God used his willing obedience to accomplish salvation for the entire human race. Contemporary believers inherit the same calling that marked Seth's life, preserving and transmitting divine truth in a corrupt world. The specific methods may differ according to historical circumstances, but the essential task remains unchanged. Each generation must decide whether to maintain faithfulness to divine revelation or compromise with prevailing cultural pressures. Seth's story offers hope for those who feel overwhelmed by the corruption around them. The appointed son lived in a world where violence and wickedness seemed triumphant. Giants ruled the earth. Evil appeared to have won complete victory. Yet his quiet faithfulness provided the foundation for eventual redemption. Similar faithfulness today contributes to purposes that will become clear in divine timing. The forgotten son who saved the world reminds us that heroism often wears ordinary clothes. The most important battles happen in human hearts rather than on famous battlefields. The greatest victories involve choosing obedience over convenience, faithfulness over popularity, truth over temporary advantage. In these quiet choices, the real work of salvation continues from generation to generation. Seth remains forgotten by most, but remembered by God. His name appears in the genealogies that trace divine purpose through human history. His spiritual influence reaches into every generation of believers. His example of faithful transmission provides the model for all who seek to serve divine purposes in their own time and place. The appointed son continues to save the world through all who follow his pattern of quiet, steady, faithful obedience to divine calling.